All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Slam, the podcast that reviews every single DC superhero ever. I'm your co-host Mike Allen. As always, I'm joined by
Joshua Marvell, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the origins of the Red Tornado.
Yes, and Red Tornado is a character that I first came across. I think there was a Superpowers toy of the Red Tornado, although he was not featured in the Superpowers cartoon, maybe briefly, but it wasn't until I read Who's Who in the late 80s that I discovered that there was another Red Tornado, which we're going to talk about today. And then as time went on, DC has revived the character in a roundabout way, which we'll talk about in our third comics review. But Josh, let me ask you, did you know anything about Red Tornado before you read this comic?
I knew about the middle version of Red Tornado, so I knew about
the android.
The android version, yes, but not about the first iteration. And I didn't really put together that Cyclone and Red Tornado were the same character or like same kind of origin.
Well, Cyclone is the granddaughter of Red Tornado 1.
Right.
Yeah. Which will and unfortunately, if you're following this podcast along chronologically, we kind of spoil the existence of the Justice Society with this episode, so we're kind of jumping around here a little bit, but it's bound to happen. But so let's talk about, so this first version of Red Tornado is a doozy. So this character, Ma Hunkel, I didn't even realize Ma Hunkel, she didn't even have her own strip. She was introduced in a comic strip called Scribbly in All American Comics number 3. Okay. But then in All American Comics number 20, which we're going to briefly talk about today, I guess there's a crime that's committed and the police are unwilling or unable to help, and so Ma Hunkel decides, well, I'm going to put on a superhero costume, actually a mystery man costume, I think she calls it, and I'm going to call myself the Red Tornado, which apparently, I'm not sure if I read this or it might be guessing, it was kind of a callback to Green Lantern, which was one of, and we should point out that although this podcast is dedicated to DC superheroes, at the time, All American Comics and Detective Comics were two different companies that shared the same office or the same building. So there was two different stables of characters, and All Americans comics or characters were eventually going to be in the Justice Society, and they did mention Superman and Batman and a few others, I believe the Spectre, but for the most part the characters were All American. All American Comics, the title just happened to be the flagship for that company.
Right.
So anyway, yeah. So in the last panel of All American Comics number 20, it's only a 4-page story. We are introduced to Red Tornado, and at first glance, if you're familiar with this character, it's going to look familiar to Marvel fans because are you familiar with Irving Forbush, Josh?
Irving Forbush? No, I don't think so.
Okay, so Irving Forbush was Marvel's kind of mascot in the 60s. So Stan Lee, and I'm not sure, I don't know much about Irving Forbush, but Stan Lee created Irving Forbush as kind of like a joke. Like sometimes he would credit Irving Forbush in the comics, and he would stick Irving Forbush in the stories. And then when they had Not Brand Eck, which was their first satire comic, Irving Forbush was the star, like kind of like the mascot of that, kind of like Alfred E. Newman would be for Mad Magazine, right? And so I think it was around that time that Irving Forbush became Forbush Man, and eventually, basically, it's the same costume, virtually the same costume. And so, for the readers out there, we should point out that the original Red Tornado. Actually, Josh, do you want to describe her costume for the?
It almost looks like she is in a red jumpsuit, and over top of the jumpsuit, she has like a yellow tank top, and it's tucked into a pair of green, like, superhero tighty whities. And she has, like, old timey like sack kind of shoes on, like brown, just like shoes, and what looks like a blanket for a cape and a bucket over her head with just kind of like a drawn on face.
I think it's actually a pot for boiling water.
Oh,
it's not a,
right.
Yeah, because now I don't know anything about Ma Hunkel, but I think the idea is that she's just a regular person, and this is like, now we should point out she's a woman, but when she's Red Tornado, everyone believes she's a man, so she's technically cross-dressing. So the first cross-dressing superhero. So the idea is that, she's a homemaker, she's raising these kids, and then she just throws together this costume with whatever's laying around, and she becomes the Red Tornado. It's purposely comedic. It's purposely mismatched colors. I guess, okay, so the first question is, Josh, what do you think of the Red Tornado's costume?
Honestly, I don't hate it. Right. Because it is this like put together, it's supposed to be a put together costume, right? Like a pot for a helmet and like washing gloves on and a blanket tied around. It's kind of charming in a weird way. Weirdly enough, like, I mean, obviously the colors are awful, just like Green Lanterns, but right. It's kind of paying homage to superheroes at the time. So I actually don't hate it. Right. And I think too, like the shape of her makes her also even like a little bit more unique.
Sure.
Like it's supposed to be Ma Hunkel's bust, right? But it kind of in the costume, it's almost drawn a little bit different, where it kind of feels like a barrel chest, and like the character feels like very strong. Yes. I don't know. It's charming in its own way. So I really don't mind that the costume looks a little strange, because I feel like it's supposed to in this. So.
Right. And we should point out that Ma Hunkel is a rotund, I don't know if she's middle-aged, but she's a tough-looking woman, like bigger sized, like you said. And now we should point out that we're reading these scanned, but unfortunately there are not remastered versions available. So we are reading very low-quality scans of like 80-year-old comics, so they are very hard to read. And so we're not going to do a full plot review of these ones, but we'll just say that in the next issue, Ma Hunkel and All American Comics 21, it's a full 5-page adventure, and she's kind of like bumbling around, trying to convince the cops that she is a superhero, but the cops really don't believe her, and she's kind of helping out. Like, I assume this is the regular cast of Scribbly, and that's pretty much it. That's all we're really going to say about it. It's a humor strip. Actually, I do think the art is actually pretty good. Yeah. I mean, are you a fan of this art? Yeah, it's actually really good. I love that it's stylized. It feels very like kid friendly, and definitely lends to like the family comedy-esque, style of the story. The characters are very unique too. Like, some of the goons are pretty funny looking. The kids all have their own little like personalities, even though they're like two kids. Like they're drawn differently. Right. Yeah, I actually enjoy the art. I do wish that the story was a little bit more readable, but I had fun with this one. We should say that in the first appearance of the Justice Society, Ma Hunkel actually does attempt to join the team, and so she is considered a founding member of the Justice Society. Right. Kind of a tongue-in-cheek, but I think that's part of the fun. I mean, I think we've mentioned this before on the show, but let's just say one more time, one of the biggest differences between Marvel and DC is that the 1960s Marvel superheroes were all created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko. Like, that's pretty much, that's it. Now, obviously, they had help with Larry Lieber and Don Heck and a few others, but the main characters were controlled by Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and Jack Kirby. DC, on the other hand, completely different creators for almost every character, right? So, with one company, you can have Scribbly with Ma Hunkel and Red Tornado, and then you can have Batman or the Sandman, and then you can also have whatever it may be, Green Lantern or whatever, right? Completely different styles, completely different genres, but all through one company. And DC did have the first super team with the Justice Society, but they were still able to do different things like this. And that's one thing I like about Golden Age DC, you know, like the humor and the relaxed attitude towards continuity. So yeah, Ma Hunkel. And so here's the thing is DC cannot let a good idea die, okay? And so they have a character called Red Tornado. Now, here's the thing. Again, coming into this continuity sideways, when I started reading in the late 80s, when I read about Red Tornado, Ma Hunkel, and Who's Who, and then I saw Red Tornado, the one that I knew, the Red Tornado with the red body and the yellow stripe on his face and like the T on his chest, I think. That's the Red Tornado I knew. But then when I saw the all red Tornado, I thought, oh, maybe that's like a Golden Age one. Not quite. What ends up happening is DC has a story in the 1950s in Mystery in Space 21, which we're going to briefly touch on. We're not going to review it. We're just going to talk about it. It's actually an Adam Strange story, and in this issue, Adam Strange fights a character called the Tornado Tyrant. Okay? No connection to Red Tornado. Did you happen to breeze through this one, Josh?
I flipped through the page. I didn't read it.
Okay, no problem. So it's Carmine Infantino art. I'm not sure who the writer is. I should have looked this up, but we'll talk about that later. It's kind of a typical 1950s, you know, sci-fi story. It's fine. But at the end of the story, the Red Tornado kind of disappears, and then we think, oh, that's the last we'll see of him. Now, we're actually going to review the next issue, which is only part one of a two-part story, so we're not going to find out the mystery, but the mystery of the of the Tornado Tyrant continues in this issue, but not in this story, but not in the issue we're about to talk about. So now we're going to talk about Justice League of America number 64, which Josh is going to tell us what happens. And we should say again, if you're following along, to make a long story very short, this is the Justice League, which is the Silver Age follow-up to the Justice Society, but taking place on a parallel Earth. Now, in this issue, we actually don't even have the Justice League. We just follow along the Society and what they're doing on that particular day on Earth 2, and Josh is going to fill us in. Right.
Okay. So I'd also like to note I'm also just getting over COVID too, so my voice is a little bit scratchy. I might have to pause to...
How can you be getting over something that doesn't exist, Josh?
I know. For 3 years, I didn't believe it was real, but I finally got
Sucker.
So we see the Justice Society sitting around a table. And we see Red Tornado kind of smashing it. Like he's coming onto... This is the cover. This is the cover.
The cover.
The cover here. So, Can I just say before you jump ahead?
Yeah. There's a lot of... That is a trope of, like, especially the mid to late 60s of...
The cover
dramatic, of a character forcing himself to join either the Justice League or the Avengers. I don't know what it is. Like, Black Lightning. I don't remember who else, but, like, people being forced... or forcing themselves to join the team for some reason. This is what they thought readers thought was exciting. I'm not a big fan of that trope, but anyway, continue.
Yeah, I'm also not a huge fan of like the heroes fighting each other over like the stupidest misunderstanding. Like, if there's a misunderstanding and it's like good for the story, it's fun when they fight, but when they just like see each other for the first time and they start wailing on each other and they're like, wait, we're both good guys. It's like, you could have both said that from the start. It doesn't make any sense that you guys were fighting.
I agree.
Anyways. So we're kind of just in the Justice Society headquarters right now. And the Red Tornado shows up to the scene. There's like this tornado that shows up, and then this man in this red costume and this cool like half purple cape, and he introduces himself as the Red Tornado, one of the original members of the Justice Society of America. So everybody here is kind of like, you're not the Red Tornado. The Red Tornado was actually a woman, and her name was Ma Hunkel. and she was like super old, so there's no way this is you. And Dr. Fate even shows a little hologram of the original Red Tornado, and they're like, yeah, see, this is not you. He's like, yeah, that's true, but I do have all of the memories of Ma Kent and or whatever, Ma Uncle.
Uncle, yeah.
So I know that my name is Red Tornado, so I must be. Who else would I be? So he also proves that he knows who they all are. So he introduces, he kind of like says, I know you're Dr. Fate, I know you're Flash, I know you're Starman, I know you're Black Canary, and I know you're Hourman. And these are all your identities and your powers. So I obviously must be the real Red Tornado. How else, would I know all this information? So they take off his mask, being like, okay, well, if it's really you, then let's see who you are. And it's like this blank, no face robot underneath. And they're all really confused and shocked. And at the same time, they're getting a fax from the future showing that there is going to be crime happening possibly soon. In the vicinity, so they all leave, and Red Tornado's like, well, I'll go with you to prove that I'm one of the good guys. So they show up, and there's this spaceship attacking, I believe it's like a dock. Oh, it's an old museum, and it just so happens that all of the bad guys attacking this museum are also faceless androids, like the Red Tornado, but they don't really make mention of it. Like, Red Tornado quickly chimes in and is like, no, Flash, I'm not one of them, if that's what you're thinking. Like, ridiculous.
Right.
So they start, mucking around with bad guys. Red Tornado swoops in and tries to save Black Canary as two of these androids kind of like sneak up on her, and in doing so he accidentally pushes her in the way of a ray, and she falls to the ground and dies. She's gone. She's dead. Yep. So then the clouds, the smoke coming out of the spaceship, start forming these creatures, and Starman is fighting them, and the same thing happens. Red Tornado starts to fight alongside him, and I believe Red Tornado gets caught up in one of the cyclones, and he falls to the ground. And when he does, he actually falls right on top of Hourman, and it kills them both. So then we see the Flash is zooming around, and somehow the Red Tornado, I believe something happens with one of his tornadoes and the Flash flying through it, where like his particles get spun up because he's moving so fast. So the Flash is like running around and slowly disappearing and just like turns into dust. And then I believe the same thing kind of happens with Dr. Fate. He's shooting magic at some of these bad guys, and somehow it gets turned around with Red Tornado's tornado, and it hits both of them actually, and they both fall to the ground. Luckily, Dr. Fate does survive, but Red Tornado kind of flies off. And this is kind of, now we're jumping back a little bit to this man named T.O. Morrow.
Right.
Lovely.
Yeah.
He is this scientist who used to fight the Justice League back in the day. And he's like this extremely smart guy, great with like machines, and essentially just like a super genius. And he is the one that created the Red Tornado to infiltrate the Justice Society. We're kind of seeing this unfold now as he's talking to a computer, talking about like, it's almost like a magic mirror type of computer where he's kind of like asking it like,
Right.
Now that I have the Red Tornado, how is this going to happen? The Justice Society will stop you by adding another member of the Justice Society by using this human isotron to create such a member called the Red Tornado. So it's just kind of like going through and showing his him creating the Red Tornado and how he's going to use it to infiltrate the Justice League. I'm pretty sure that's all that happens here, right? I'm trying to remember what this is all about here.
This is so basically what happens is if you flip back, the computer tells him that the only way he can accomplish his treasure theft is if the Red Tornado is there to stop you.
Right.
So then he's like, oh, I guess I better revive the Justice Society. So he revives the Justice Society, and then if you flip through, then the Red Tornado sort of accidentally wipes everyone out again. If you flip through, because then the other heroes come in, Mr. Terrific, Sandman, and the Atom.
Right.
Oh, and Green Lantern and Dr. Fate, and then he wipes them all out too. And so then he's like, okay, well, and then he punches into the computer. What about my plan to? What does he say here? He wants to do? Whatever his plan is, the only way that it's going to work is if the Red Tornado intervenes. So now he's like, oh, I guess I got to revive him again.
Yeah.
And so again, this is only part one. There is a part two, but from and we're not going to review it. But in part two, I believe somehow that's where we find out that the Red Tornado, the Tornado Champion, found its way into the Red Tornado's body. Just like basically, honestly, it's stupid because
it's very convoluted.
I believe the Tornado Champion was already called Red Tornado, but then it found the android that was also called Red Tornado, so it joined to its body and blah blah blah. Okay, let me just say this. Let's just start with the positive. I actually love this art. I really, really do.
Yeah.
This is I mean, it's not as good as say Kurt Swan, but this is classic 1950s, 60s DC Silver Age art. I can't say enough about it. What do you think?
Especially since it's like the remastered work and it's very clean. I feel like the original art would be that much better.
You're right.
No, I really do love it, and it is a highlight in this kind of crummy, weird, convoluted story that's happening.
Yes. Like basically, if you just flip back, the way that he draws, like there's a one page where the Red Tornado's convincing the society. Oh yeah, well obviously I used to be a member because I know all these things about you.
Right.
And there's like a splash page right there. It's just
great.
such a lovely page. It's great. Like each one of those 5 pictures is a pinup on its own, and the way that Dick Dillin just fills up the page, like if you flip through, his storytelling is great, but also he's cramming a lot into each panel.
Oh, yeah.
To the point that a lot of times things are spilling out a little bit, but he knows how to fill up the panel in a way. Like look at the shot here of the Red Tornado turning into like a, what is that? Like a
cyclone, like a tornado. Yeah.
Like a tornado. Like you see his legs, and then it comes up and gets bigger as it comes towards the reader, then smashes into the 2 guys to help out Black Canary. But what a great way to fill up that panel with all this stuff, you know? And then the next panel, look at, you've got Black Canary in the foreground, and you have Red Tornado just at the tiny bottom corner, and then you have the bad guy shooting, and then you have these little bubbles of energy around, so that it's almost like he's packing in every little corner of every panel, and even at the bottom, the way Black Canary falls, and then she's big in the foreground, and in the background you see the Red Tornado and the bad guy. Like it's just great. Yeah. And you know, I've read tons of stories by Dick Dillin when I was younger, but I think I'm appreciating him even more now that I'm older. I think he's a great artist. Let's talk about the story.
Sure. I mean, there's not much of like a story happening here. It's very...
The thing is I appreciate, because that's one thing DC would do, is they'd almost have a gimmick and then they would explain almost like a mystery, like, why is Jimmy Olsen marrying an ape? And then you have to read the story to find out. Or why does Superman have the head of an ant, right? And in this story, it's why is
Why is the red tornado killing all of my favorite characters?
And also, why is the magic mirror telling Teomoro that that's how he can accomplish all of his plans? Now, obviously, we're going to find out in part 2, but it just seems like a very convoluted way to get us to this mystery. And I appreciate what they're doing, but I guess there's a better way they could have done it. Now, again, with the half-assed way that I explained how this all ties together, couldn't they have simplified his origin a little bit? You know, like this tornado champion and tying in Ma Hunkel, and also, why are we jumping over to the Justice Society in the Justice League book? Why didn't they just introduce this red tornado in the Justice League? I don't know. I don't know. So I don't know what to say about this one. I must say, though, it does make me want to go back and read more of these 60s Justice Leagues by Gardner Fox and Dick Dillin. What about you?
Yeah, I would like to have a curated list of some of the good issues and the good arcs to go back and read, because I do kind of like a lot of this stuff. It's just a bummer that this story isn't very good and a little confusing.
Yeah, very.
Because I kind of almost like it, and would like to know more, but it's kind of just nonsense at this point to get the red tornado back. And I don't know, I feel like there could be so many ways to incorporate this character back onto the team. Right. I know. Instead of just bursting in and, hey, I'm Ma Hunkel, like I'm Red Tornado, like it's just silly. And again, you can argue, well, this is meant for kids, it's supposed to be silly, but they still could have made it better, you know? Yeah. But yeah, the art, I absolutely love the art. Nothing bad to say about the art. Okay, so now, as we said, we could have reviewed, you know, like Red Tornado had his own miniseries in the 80s and all that, but it was kind of just the same version of the character, not really revamped, just kind of brought back. So we decided to jump ahead, way ahead. I'm not sure if this is the farthest we've gone in this podcast, but we're jumping to 2007. And to be honest, I think it's the newest comic we've reviewed here. This is I didn't even know about this character until I saw Black Adam. What about you? Had you ever heard of Cyclone? I had heard about Cyclone, but to be honest, knew nothing about the character. Okay. I don't even know if I would have been able to like pinpoint her with like her costume and everything. Right. Like I've only really kind of known about the character and who, like, you know, that she's part of the Justice Society. Other than that, no, not really at all. So, this is okay. So again, quick backstory. So the Justice Society is the original super team. Then in 1960, they introduced the Justice League on Earth 1. In 85, DC merges the two Earths. So now we have an even more convoluted history where we have the Golden Age characters in the Golden Age in the World War II, and then we have the Justice League in, quote, modern day, which keeps sliding through time to be more recent. And then DC gets rid of the Justice Society, then they bring them back, then they get rid of them. And then I think it was in 97 they brought back the full team as the JSA series, still called the Justice Society, but the series was JSA. This was like basically a reboot. So this is picking up right from where JSA left off. And in this issue, they're introducing some new characters that they're going to be recruiting to the team. Mm-hmm. And we'll be talking about many of them on this podcast because that is the nature of this podcast, to talk about legacy characters in DC. So I'm going to summarize what happens in this issue. Basically, it's picking up after the World War III storyline in the JLA by Grant Morrison. And we get this, I have to say it, this cheesy speech from Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, saying how the world needs better good guys and what can we do to help and blah, blah, blah. And
And then we cut over to some first-person narration from a character. We don't know who it is at first, but he's investigating a murder. And then he comes in, and we find out it's Mr. America, which is an old Golden Age DC character, and acting suspiciously more like a Batman-ish type vigilante. But he's investigating a murder, and then we find out it's actually his own wife that's been murdered. Right? Like bludgeoned to death, it looks like. Then we cut back over to the main story, and we see the society members, the Flash, Green Lantern, and Wildcat looking at pictures of potential members, and we've got Mr. Terrific, Power Girl, Liberty Bell, Hourman, Stargirl, and Dr. Midnight. And they're just kind of like talking about them all and kind of joking around, and they're having a little bit of flashback, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And then we cut over to, okay, this is where it gets confusing again, because I know that most people are big fans of this series, but I never really read it. But this is Damage, who is the grandson of the original Golden Age Atom, I believe. Right. And I think he goes on to become Atom Smasher, I think. But there's, fanboys everywhere that are getting ready to attack us for not knowing that. But anyway, so he's fighting this bad guy. I don't even know who he is. But
Rebel.
Rebel. So this guy's racist. He's making racist comments. They're fighting back and forth. And then he ends up defeating him, and he's getting kind of extra violent. Then just at that moment, Hourman and Liberty Bell come in to recruit him to the Justice Society. He basically doesn't want to join, but he kind of goes along with them anyway. Then we cut back over to the other plot, which is Mr. America investigating this crime. And he comes across a guy in the middle of committing another crime, and it's his brother. Is it his brother? Yes, his younger brother and his family, or his wife. And so now this bad guy has killed another family, and then he kind of lets loose on this guy, and he's talking about justice and blah blah blah. Then we cut over to the reason that we're reviewing this issue, and we are introduced to. Is it Maxine Hunkel? Yes, Maxine Hunkel. And it's kind of interesting because it's not often that we see experimentation like this in a mainstream comic, but we're getting panels that are seen. So one panel is her talking really quickly to her roommate. Then it's a panel of her sitting by herself in a cafeteria. Then it's... I just accidentally skipped a page. Awesome. What happened? Then it's... sorry. First it was her in class. Then it was her...
in like a lecture hall or something. Yeah,
right. Then it was the other two that I just mentioned, and then we see her standing on top of a building. And at first I thought, oh no, is she gonna commit suicide? And then we cut down to the society members kind of looking up at her, talking about her. Then she jumps off the ledge and she starts floating around like on the breeze, basically, kind of showing that she has superpowers. And then Mr. Terrific and Power Girl kind of start talking to her. And again, offering her membership in the Justice Society. And then there's a gag about her. I guess she talks really quickly, and so there's a gigantic speech bubble
it's great
behind their heads of her just talking, and then Power Girl covers up her mouth with her hand and says, "Okay, one more word, and we're revoking our offer." And she Maxine covers up her mouth when she has little tears coming out of her eyes, but she's smiling. She's like, "Okay, fine." And so then anyway, then we cut back to the other one of the other subplots, and basically now we are introduced to, again, this is Star Boy from the future, but in this story he's called Starman because at some point I believe in what's his name? The Starman series by everyone knows his name. I can't remember the writer's name, but he became Starman. And again, I'm not familiar with the story. Guess what? Surprise! I never read Starman. Maybe a couple of issues it was fine, but I didn't go on to read more. So we're introduced to Starman, and no one really knows who he is or what he does, but we find out through his conversation with Dr. Midnight that he thinks that he is a schizophrenic, right? Mm-hmm. And then we cut to Mr. America. He's kind of continuing to narrate his story, and then he... There's kind of like a little mini cliffhanger where he's like all alone. He's talking to himself, but then there's a shadow of someone talking to him, but we don't find out who it is yet. Then we cut over to Maxine, who is reunited with her grandmother, Ma Hunkel, right? And they kind of have a little conversation, and then we cut over to a meeting of the Justice Society, and Ma Hunkel is bringing Maxine in, and we see everyone sitting down at this meeting, including Damage, including Starman, including the other characters that we mentioned, Liberty Bell, Hourman. And then on the very last page, we they're talking, and then all of a sudden, and we cut back over to Mr. America, who is getting tossed around by someone and then thrown off of the edge of a building just as he's saying, "I can't let justice die." And then we're cutting back and forth between 2 or 3 scenes, and then he smashes through the glass dome of the society headquarters, and then he crashes right onto the table. And then someone off camera says, "He's your son," talking to Damage, right? Is it Damage? Actually, I don't know who he's talking to.
I think that...
yeah, the close-up there. Is that Damage or is that someone else?
No, that's... what's his name here? Oh, wait, maybe that's...
I don't know who it is. I can't remember. Yeah. But if you look at the map,
what's his name?
Wildcat. Wildcat.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I do love the Justice Society, but I'm not familiar with the status quo of the team at this point. So I'll just leave it at that. But then on the very last page, we get a preview of things to come in Justice Society, which is like allusions to stories involving Batman, involving Starman, Power Girl, and the Kingdom Come Superman, which we're not going to talk about right now. We're just going to talk about the main story. But that is it. I've never, ever read this issue before. Josh, tell me, have you ever read this Justice Society series?
No, I have not.
Interesting. Okay. So what do you think of this issue?
I kind of liked it. A lot happens in it. But I will say for as much that does happen, it doesn't feel as convoluted as the previous issue. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you felt the same.
You know, every Geoff Johns comic is this. It's hard to explain how I feel. It's good enough that I can keep reading, but not good enough that I want to read more. It's kind of it's very on the fine line, and it is convoluted. But that's not my issue with it. My issue is this is supposed to be a golden age throwback. Like it's appealing to people that like these types of characters. So I don't understand why we have a character say to another, you know, she cried like a bitch. Mm-hmm. And then there's actually, this is, Geoff Johns has this weird habit of like being overly violent. Like for a guy, again, that likes traditional superheroes, I don't understand why he's going to take this Mr. America character who's been around for 80 years and just wipe the floor with him in such a violent way. I don't get that. And the art is actually pretty good. I think Dale, what's his name? I don't know how to pronounce his name. Dale Eaglesham. He actually gets better as the series goes on. He's actually a really good artist, especially for this genre, like kind of classic Golden Age heroes. But I just feel like if it's supposed to appeal to people that like these throwback characters, to me, someone like Darwin Cook on New Frontier would have been a more appropriate creator for something like this. But I did think it was pretty good. Like as mainstream DC comics go, it was pretty good.
Yeah, I see what you mean, because it does have like the classic characters in it. So you'd think that it would have a more like traditional superhero story and not be like updated and violent.
Right.
It kind of has like an interesting in between of that. Like it's updated and gritty, but also feels old school. It's strange. It kind of reminds me of like an old noir or something because because it is very like real world, like street level at times, like even when heroes are just fighting in the streets, like it feels very like the stakes are high, like it's very violent, but because the characters are old school, like the style, it kind of has that like, you know, old like gumshoe detective like feel to it. So the style is intriguing. And I feel like maybe it didn't push it too far for me now, but I can see it maybe being too much after a while.
Right.
Continuing this series.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why, despite how much people rave about it, I just never went on to read more. I have read, I think, the first issue of each series, and then I think when at some point I was picking up random issues depending on the covers, because Alex Ross did all the covers, but it never hooked me quite enough to want to keep going. So I do like it, but I should also point out one of my pet peeves about this series is that these characters, the whole point of the Justice Society and the whole point of having Earth 2 is that these characters are tied to World War II. These characters were all around 20, 25 years old in 1940. Why are they still young? Yes, I know there's an explanation, but the point is that if we're going to have these characters and we're going to tie them to World War II, they can't also have what's it called, the sliding time scale. You have one or the other. You can't have your cake and eat it too. They're either tied to World War II or they're not. And if they are, they should all be dead in the ground. The Green Lantern, Flash, and if you really love these characters so much, you can do flashback stories set in the 1950s and 60s and 70s when they were still alive, right? But anyway, that's another story. But we're actually here to talk specifically about Maxine Hunkel, right?
Right.
Cyclone, which is the follow-up character to Red Tornado. So, I mean, maybe slightly overdone, but as far as like a short 4 or 5 page way to introduce a new character, I thought she was fine. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought that she was definitely the standout character of this issue. Like, she has the most character to her. Like, I understand who she is just from, a few pages. Like, really, a few panels can describe this whole character. Like, we see her by herself at lunchtime, and she's still kind of like happy and bubbly. She's sitting in the dorm room, and she's kind of like quiet to herself, already unpacked, while everybody else is kind of like messy and throwing things around and has things kind of like everywhere. She's like raising her hand during class. Everybody's asleep in the lecture hall while she's up there. Like we clearly see her character, and then her like doing the free fall, almost like dancing as she's like flying and using her powers is great. And then this panel of like these two heroes, and then the dialogue, the like copious amounts of dialogue behind them taking up the panel is so good. It's like it perfectly describes her character, and she's not even in the panel. It's fantastic. And like,
that's a good point.
I didn't read all of this.
No,
you're not meant to, right? It's supposed to just be kind of like a wall of dialogue. And I don't know. I just think that this is a very creative way to introduce her and not have to overly explain who she is. It's great.
Okay, it's funny because as you're saying that, I actually was skimming through the bubble, and she actually talks about why she chose the name Cyclone, and I missed it.
Oh.
It's because when Ma Hunkel was Red Tornado, the full name of the characters was Red Tornado and the Cyclone Kids. So that's where she gets Cyclone from. Anyway, so it's kind of cool. She actually explains it. So so this is what I'm going to say. If you love mainstream superheroes, I think you'll like the series. This series by Geoff Johns is very popular for a good reason. It's just not quite my cup of tea. For retro, I guess you want to call them superheroes, I already mentioned New Frontier, but I've always got to give a plug to Alan Moore's Supreme. Alan Moore also did work on Youngblood. Yes, I know the name is tainted, but he did work on Youngblood. And then he did ABC Comics with Tom Strong. And of course, this is good, but I'm sorry, Alan Moore's better, right? So anyway, I'm going to recommend those. But as far as a legacy character, Red Tornado and Typhoon or Cyclone, interesting characters. Somehow the middle Red Tornado is the odd man out.
Which is strange.
Right.
Yeah.
I never understood why it's just like with Marvel with Vision. If you're going to have Vision, who's an android, why is his power intangibility? If you're going to have an android with DC, also red, why is his power to turn into a tornado?
Right.
Why those two don't go together? But that's fine, whatever. I don't know if you've got those. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Let's talk about her costume. I honestly didn't realize she had the striped stockings.
Yeah, it's good. I kind of like it.
They're okay. Yeah. I mean, at least she's kind of sticking with the original color scheme. Obviously that. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Alex Ross, but that's a nice cover with her right there. That's a nice shot. I think now let's talk about the movie version.
Sure.
I really like that movie costume from Black Adam. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see this character again because of the big reboot, but I really liked Typhoon in the movie and the actor. Yeah, like big fan of the character, actually. And because of that, Black Adam, the movie, introduced me to Maxine Hunkel. And so that's one good thing that came out of Black Adam.
I think visually it's great to kind of, I mean, it makes sense here for this costume, right? Like kind of making her costume a little bit flowy and long. And they can obviously draw it where it looks flowy. Like here, it almost looks like cellophane or something. Like it looks crinkly. And here it looks like fabric, but it's very like droopy. But here you can really tell that it's like this sheer like light fabric. So when she is spinning around, it feels like it's floating and like moving around. And visually, obviously in the movie, that was definitely the case. And it did definitely add to the character. And you could see the effects of her powers without having to have like a physical tornado there, like a cartoon, like, you know, triangle tornado. You can tell that like stuff is happening with her fabric and how she's moving around. So I do, and I love the green and the purple. It's a great like update
I do.
From the red for sure.
I like the green and the purple better. I do like this costume. I like this character. So we should also point out, I'm not reading it, but the Justice Society is back as we record this. They're launching a new series. They're bringing back Jay Garrick Flash and Wesley Dodds Sandman, like as we speak.
That's awesome.
Back. So I mean, I hope they, you know, again, it's odd because some of the art choices are not what I would pick for a Golden Age revival, but whatever, that's fine. We'll see how these things turn out. Hopefully they're good. But I should say that I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Slam, and next week is going to be a big one, Josh.
Ooh, okay.
We're finally going to get to the Justice Society of America and the Justice League of America, okay? So we kind of spoiled some of it this week, but next week we're finally going to learn the origin of the Society and the League.
That's very exciting.
And then go from there, so be sure to join us on that episode. And then if the strike ends, we will be releasing our episodes of Tape Crusaders, so be sure to listen to those and continue to listen to and watch our reviews of all the superhero movies that have been coming out. And that's it. And Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, we want to thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. You can find all of our stuff over on our website at thecomicbooksyndicate.com. You can also find all of our podcasts on our YouTube channel under the same name. And we are slowly like turning all of our podcasts into video podcasts again. So if you would like to see visual representation of the comic books that we are talking about, go check us out there. And leave us a review, leave us a comment, let us know what you guys think about the stuff that we're talking about. We want to keep that comics conversation going, so keep in touch.
That's right. So until the next time, see you later.
All right.